What is a man? Specifically, what does it mean to be a Christian and a man in 2024? Of course, Matt Walsh made a huge splash online when he showed the complete confusion and contradiction underlying the transgender movement by asking, what is a woman? But when I ask, what is a man? I mean to focus on some specific characteristics to which all men should aspire. What does it mean to be a man in modern culture? Is it this hyper-aggressiveness and crudity of an Andrew Tate? Or is it a benign passivity of a Ward Cleaver? Even within Christian circles, the concept of biblical masculinity is being questioned, with books like Kristen Dumais' Jesus and John Wayne stating that modern evangelicalism has been overrun by a macho culture. Well, is this true? Hi everyone, welcome to another Come Let Us Reason Together. Today, I feature a discussion I had with Kirkwood Center's president and my colleague Anthony Costello on the Kirkwood Center channel. We look at extremes, the stereotypes, and the assertions of how manhood has gone wrong today. But we also look to Jesus, the primary example of what being a true man is, and offer an idea of biblical manhood that becomes something, well, a bit different from what both the secularists and folks like Dumais are trying to make it. It's an important topic, one we must pay attention to as more and more men are facing crises today like never before. So let's explore Christianity and how it can inform our masculinity on this Come Let Us Reason Together.
All right, everyone. Welcome again to the Kirkwood Center podcast for theology and ethics. On tonight's roundtable discussion, I'll be joined by Kirkwood Center Vice President Lenny Esposito. Lenny, how are you doing tonight?
Good, Tony. Glad to be here. Interesting topic we have today. One that I think a lot of people are going to want to dig in on because it's really starting to rear its head in our society. Where do men fit in today's world?
Yes, this is the question that has come up in so many different areas of the culture, right? I mean, whether it be in politics, in entertainment, movies, and also in the sports world, So,
well, here's two primary examples. We are in the summer of women right now. So you have Taylor Swift, Beyonce, and the Barbie movie just steamrolling billions of dollars through the entertainment industry, right? And you followed up, of course, on the tails of the whole Me Too movement several years ago, and and then toxic masculinity and all that. So it is something interesting. And then you with the sports, the women's soccer team has been gathering quite a bit of attention before they lost in their World Cup.
And then of course, as we've called it on other platforms, the great social experiment that is transgenderism. Which would obviously which very much blurs the line of what is a woman and what is a man. But then we're getting I guess in all of this is obviously filtering down into the church, and we're getting reactions to it in the form of various kinds of books, sermon series, podcasts on what is biblical manhood, what is biblical womanhood, and critical theory and social justice versions or takes on men and women obviously are abound. So it's a huge topic. I know we think all the topics that we discuss are huge. We're trying not to discuss things that are too esoteric or obscure, but so let's start with this, where there was with regards to one of the reactions to this confusion about what is a man, what is a woman, what is typical of a man, what is typical of a woman. Is there anything that we can say definitively about one or the other? And is a growing sense that men are under attack, whatever it is that, men, biological men, are under attack, and what we might say traditional masculine roles and identities are being attacked and discarded and basically moralized over, right? And always in the negative. And that's the toxic masculinity accusation, right?
Right.
So we have a little bit of maybe work to do in the sense, okay, well, what are some of these roles and traditional identities that biological men, at least in the Western context, have exemplified, and why are they under attack, right? So one of the answers to that we're seeing is going under the name of something like that's been called vitalism. Okay.
Well, yeah, it's a response, really. It's a counter movement to
the accusation against. Right.
And usually when you have something like that that swings one direction really hard, then the counter movement swings hard the other way. Andrew Tate, for example, who's a popular podcaster and social media celebrity, has garnered a lot of attention as one of these kinds of guys who's like, breathing testosterone and really is bristles with this kind of full-on masculinity that he tries to sell and package as the proper way to understand human men.
Right. So he would be sort of an example, I think, of this vitalist strain of thinking that, again, seems to be reacting against this attack on men and masculinity. So when I say vitalism, and Lenny, this is something that, we wanted to point out, we're not talking about the 18th, century, 19th century view, sort of metaphysical view of what is the property of living things. It's some kind of property of, vital property that distinguishes a rock from, a biological organism.
Right. Vita meaning life in the Latin.
Yeah. It applies more to, I guess, what we'd call maybe sort of anthropology, that there's a sort of life force, right? An ancient life force. And of course, it is best exemplified by a certain kind of man, right? And a lot of people will reference Nietzsche, for example, as someone who is trying to sort of revitalize vitalism in this sense. I think of maybe also a woman who tried to do so, 20th century philosopher by the name of Ayn Rand, who our listeners will probably know, I think, who also had a similar take on this idea of vitalism, and that being that there should be no sort of moral restraints, and that specifically Judeo-Christian morality here, upon the man of greatness, right? The man who sort of seeks to pull himself up by his bootstraps and to achieve everything that this innate drive in him seeks to attain, that he should just unreservedly sort of pursue beauty, greatness, success, conquest, whatever he puts his mind to. If there's any sort of moral reservation, that he should sort of dismiss that moral reservation and just sort of go for it with gusto. And this is sort of like Nietzsche's idea of the Dionysian man who's unrestrained by good and evil, that he sort of sees in the Homeric epics. So that's at least my brief summation of what I'm seeing.
Yeah, Ayn Rand was, I mean, her philosophy was objectivism, the term she coined for it, but it's basically a form of that.
Yeah.
I think this vitalism is something a little bit newer, but it holds a lot of the same aspects. It holds a lot of those same properties in it, and it pushes these kinds of ideas. So it's not necessarily something that's completely new. We've seen this before in different forms and in different packages, but it as we said, it's a reaction. It's a counter movement to try and allow men to reclaim what they feel they may have lost, and this swings from everybody from the true patriarchal person who's longing for a male-dominated society to incels to everybody else. But we want to be cautious and not paint this too broadly, because there's a lot of gray area in between. And that's part of the problem. So, for example, in her book, The Toxic War on Masculinity, Nancy Pearcey quotes a college professor who asks his students this question, and male students, and she says they all at West Point, new cadets, and the professor says, "Tell me what it means to be a good man." And universally, the definition comes back always the same: is one who has integrity, one who provides for his family, one who doesn't lie, one who is committed to his job, is faithful, et cetera, et cetera. The virtuous, basically, is what we would do. She goes, "Okay." And he says, "Well, wait a minute. If I said to you, tell me what it means to be a real man, buck up, be a real man.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean?" And they all respond, "Oh, that's completely different.
Okay.
That's being tough. That's being right." And so what Pearcey does is she makes a distinction between the idea of being a good man and being a real man. Our culture today has taken those and bifurcated them. The good man really is the man who embodies Christian virtue. These are the transcendentals, the idea that you want to be virtuous. Yeah. But our society also says, in order to be a real man, you've got to be tough. You got to fight for what you want. You got to, grab the brass ring, right? All of those things that we kind of hear about toxic masculinity seem to kind of be poured into some of that. So there is a bifurcated concept going on in our society. And it's interesting that what happens is the vitalists seem to be grabbing onto the real man persona to the exclusion of the good man persona, right, which I think is interesting.
Which is, that's funny, because although I haven't read this book, I've read critiques of it, but this was the book that came out a year or two ago by Kristen Kobletz Dumas, I think is her name, the Jesus and John Wayne book.
Yeah, Kristen
Dumas.
Where,
yeah. It seems, at least from the reviews that I wrote, that she was using John Wayne as this foil of sort of like what Christian men at least should not be like, or that the John Wayne stereotype has somehow bastardized or diluted, not diluted, but polluted, sort of like the identity that is rightly a Christian male identity. Now, I don't know the contents of the book, but it's funny because you mentioned here Pearcey talking about the bifurcation of the good man and the real man, where the good man is all these virtues and the real man is tough and everything. But I grew up watching a lot of John Wayne movies with my dad, and for the most part, the only real addition in the characters he plays to the virtuous man is that, yeah, he's physically tough. That's all. He can sort of fight. But he's in most of the movies, he's not a liar. He's not a cheat. You know,
Yeah.
he's not unvirtuous in those
No,
other.
and he stands up for the little guy and does things
He
like so.
stands up.
So
I
this
mean,
is
the Man Who Shot Liberty Valance is a classic one.
yeah.
He's, you know, you know, that's actually a good movie for people to watch if they haven't seen it, because you got the Jimmy Stewart character who does want to solve everything through law, through right governance, through negotiation and policy, and he goes off to be the senator in Washington. And John Wayne is sort of the frontier character who still's like, but there are some people you just can't do that with, and Liberty Valance is one of them. You have to fight him because he will not listen to you talk about politics and rational negotiations and all this stuff.
So
He will shoot you if you don't
yeah,
listen to him. And
and
you know, so anyways,
I think part of the problem is that again, it's another example, another symptom of the fact that we are dealing with the conceit of affluence. And what I mean by that is we do not have to struggle, for the most part, day in and day out to survive. And the struggling to survive is where men excel. So, for example, you know, you can talk about men being overly aggressive, using their testosterone, swinging their fists, using their muscles. Okay, then let's talk about Todd Beamer on Flight 95 and those guys who had to take down the Muslim terrorists who were wanting to take that plane and use it as a bomb towards a building. Do you think women can do that? That all of those kind of toxic masculine aspects are necessary in those conditions. And for most of humanity, it was necessary to have those ideals to survive. And it was just, it's part of how the world works. But today, it's easy to critique them simply because you're so protected by the Christian civilization
that we live in. Right.
That's right.
I mean, that's still, although it's crumbling, it still sort of keeps us reasonable and safe. But, you know, it's interesting you mentioned the what's called toxic masculinity is this sort of physical aggression that's needed when the conditions are hard, right? Either because you are in a you're in a set of circumstances that is not conducive to your survival, right?
Right.
And it could be forging, it could be against nature, it could be against other people, other men. What's interesting, that sort of ruggedness, that necessary kind of toughness that we don't need, at least right now, and we haven't needed for a while. What's interesting, to go back to my point about, and I think we said this before, but not basing our conclusions about things based off of fiction or fictional characters. So the Vitalist, on the one hand, refers back to, you know, there's this book that was written by a pseudo, what's it called when you don't write under your own name?
Pseudonym.
A pseudonym.
Or a pen name.
The pen name was Bronze Age Pervert. I guess he's an online personality. I'd never heard of him before, just earlier today when I read a couple of these articles. And it was, you know, the Bronze Age mindset. You know, and this is, again, something that, like Nietzsche, when you talk about Nietzsche is referring back to the Homeric heroes. Well, they're fictional characters. I mean, you don't necessarily base your conclusions off what should be done or how we should live off of the imaginations of Homer, for instance.
Oh my gosh, Odysseus would be a terrible role model.
Yeah, and they would be terrible role models to begin with, but they were also weren't real. And what I worry about is, now you mentioned the term incels, and I've heard this before, that I don't know what it refers to. Maybe you could help me out.
Incels is a common idea about individuals who feel that because they perhaps aren't 9s or 10s on the attractiveness scale, they still deserve to have as much sexual proclivity as other individuals who are maybe a luckier draw in the gene pool. So basically, it's folks that are demanding their bedtime.
Oh, okay. I thought it was, well, it's related. I thought it was sort of the nerdy guy sitting in his parents' basement on the internet all day long, but maybe they're sort of related concepts. But, you know, so you wonder, like, whoever this Bronze Age pervert is. Now, we don't know. I don't know. I mean, some people think that he's Steve Bannon or is in with Steve Bannon. But you know what? I always wonder about people who might promote a sort of, you know, pagan, almost a pagan kind of a retrieval of some kind of pagan inspired masculinity. I mean, have they gone to war? Yeah. I mean, have they been soldiers? Have they done anything themselves? It's at the breaking point of the body and the mind, or are they sort of like these incel, or, you know, sitting on in their mom and dad's basement on their computers? Because I mean, my military career was not illustrious in any way, so I'm not going to talk about myself. But I know people who have been at the breaking point several times and have done the dirty work in places like Afghanistan and Iraq. Now, most of the guys I'm thinking of were also devout Christians. Okay. You know, so I always wonder about these people who fantasize about some kind of masculine model from literature or something, but that themselves have never really put themselves into any kind of difficult or challenging position. They've not been in uniform. They've not deployed to an Afghanistan or an Iraq, you know, and so that there right there concerns me. And the other thing is that what you said earlier, you know, you think about then on the other side, this sort of more liberal or left-leaning mindset that decries toxic masculinity, but then takes the same traits that are associated with toxic masculinity and puts them into every strong female character in every movie we have. So we're now every James Bond style main character is some 120-pound woman in a tight black jumpsuit who can kick ass, you know, and she's going to go and take out, you know, 50 hulking dudes and with her kung fu kicks that never work in real life. By the way, kung fu is not a very practical. I mean, you know, you don't see him doing wrestling with the guys on the ground is what would happen. Right. But, you know, so that toxic masculinity, all that stuff of kicking butt and just being violent and going through, now it's being put onto the character of fictional women.
Yes. And this concerns me. Yeah. This concerns me deeply because, as you say, we tend to look at our arts and interpret our reality through that lens. Yeah. And it becomes more and more likely that, you know, young girls hear the message, women can do anything that men can do. Yeah. And women,
and that's Trinity in the Matrix.
Right. And they take even if they were to take self-defense classes and things like that. What would happen in real life is if one guy lands one punch, it's over. All of a sudden, all that bravado that she thinks she has will stop.
Yeah.
And for this, you know, we can just look back to even well-trained athletes. If you remember, there was a transgender MMA boxer, I think it was a boxer, not an MMA.
It was the fight that made Joe Rogan go, I'm not on board with the transgender.
So Fallon Fox was the transgender individual who got into the ring with basically the female who was destined to be the world champion.
Right.
And he put her in the hospital.
Yeah.
Because she said, look, I fought all my life. I've never been punched like that in my, you know, I've never felt that before. And that's what I'm saying is you're 30% more muscle mass, higher bone density. It's not even going to be close. And to have these girls think that, oh, I can do it, it scares me, because if they are attacked, it's going to go really, really bad.
Yeah, so you have something like this vitalism view, which wants to recapture something of just sort of the most rudimentary aspects of male testosterone driven aggression, I guess, at the end of the day. And it's sort of physical, but also in a sort of psychological sense. I had not heard of Andrew Tate until just a couple of weeks ago. But you're probably right in using him as an exemplar of this, of somebody who kind of wants to dominate a woman, not just physically, but also psychologically.
Well, he just,
Yeah.
You read all of the Man Up posts that he talks about and how his father would basically almost abuse him as a child, say that's not the way to romantic, you're not getting your hair cut like that, that's a sissy way to get your hair. I'm cleaning up the language.
Yeah, right.
But so there's a lot of expletives, there's a lot of the my man, and oh, that's okay if you're going to cry, people, that's how life is hard and people will have to suffer. And so all of these kinds of ideas, and then he said, I'm glad my dad put me through my paces. I'm glad he made me tough and made me cry. And that's his shtick, so to speak.
Well, and it does raise the question, though, and I think it's something our colleague Logan has been bringing up. Now, is there, though, not a place for a certain kind of toughening up, though?
Yes.
Where it's not the process is it not itself an abusive one, which sounds like what happened with Tate,
right?
And it's also not one devoid of grace and mercy and love, which would maybe be I don't even know if that's pagan.
So yeah, this goes kind of even underscoring. You talk to psychology professors and others, and they'll tell you, when you watch parents with children, there's a marked difference in the way they handle their toddlers. Okay. Women will nurture and cuddle. The kid falls, scrapes a knee, starts to cry. Mom comes, scoops him up, kisses the boob, and makes him feel better, right? That kind of thing. Dads will tend to throw children in the air and catch them. And mom, of course, is a little concerned about this. Oh my gosh, but that's as important as the other. So, for example, my son played hockey. And when he was learning how to play hockey and learning how to skate in his earlier years, they would force them to fall. They'd say, you have to fall because you need to learn how to get up from when you fall. If you're in a game, sooner or later, you're going to trip, you're going to fall. And you better learn how to get up fast on skates. If you never fall, you never learn how to get up. Our problem in our society today, because we are what we would call a matrilineal society, we're not a patriarchy per se, not really. We're not a matriarchy either. We're a matrilineal society. What it means is the mom is, in all aspects, kind of the one who actually runs the house. It's her schedule, that she sets, and it's usually based on the children and how they need to get here, there, and everywhere. And the husband normally says, can we go to the folks' house on Saturday night? And she says, yeah, our schedule, so it's a matrilineal society. But because we've become overemphasized in our culture on safety, and we saw this through COVID, right, in spades, but safetyism and protectiveness, right? You get the idea of helicopter moms comes out of this in the extreme, but we never let our kids suffer. We think that if they go to bed crying, we failed somehow as parents. But if they never learn to fail, they never learn that it's okay. Tomorrow the sun will still rise. You learn how to fix through the problem, and you move ahead. And that's the point where we have to be able to do this. And fathers are better at it than mothers because they look at it a little bit more objectively. That nurturing instinct that mothers have. And again, this isn't all people in all ways, but it's a general approach that you see played out many times, that the nurturing and protective care that mothers provide has been the primary or the bigger aspect of rearing children, as opposed to the, children at 5, here's your chores. Children, at 7, hey, you have to go and feed the cattle and gather the eggs from the chicken, because if you don't, we don't eat. We need your work. At 9, you're working in the field, right? We just don't do that stuff with our kids anymore. We don't have to, but we lose something in the process.
Well, yeah, that's right. And if we do it, maybe we just do it like on vacation when we got a couple weeks free and we get a couple things. And I was thrilled that I got to take my kids to Wyoming last week, and we did the whitewater rafting on the Snake River, which I had done several times when I was a kid. And it was great, just digging into the water, paddling through the rapids with my boys. But this does bring back to a point of where maybe and this is something that Logan and I talked about on the radio show a couple weeks ago for apologetics.com. Losing touch with our bodies, right? Losing touch with the physicalness of our bodies and what they're for, and how they're kind of designed to use. And as technology just advances and allows us to do less and less with our bodies and increasingly more with our minds, that we sort of get disenchanted, or we become sort of disembodied, right? And you think, like, if men are doing less and less things that male bodies would have done in the past, as well as women not doing the same kinds of things that are most natural to the female body, like having and raising children, especially, that this can affect, obviously can have an effect. And this one's kind of like nobody's fault. We make technology. We're homo faber, we're a man maker of things, as well as homo religiosus and homo sapiensis. But we make these technologies, they take away from our embodied life. And when we don't use our bodies in a particularly masculine bodily way, or a particularly feminine bodily way, that can affect our understanding of what our identity as a man or a woman might be. So I think it's just something we need to be aware of, and we need to be more intent. And that might also be giving rise to this desire for something that seems extremely masculine, like just being physically aggressive with your body, just using your body.
Right.
Very physically aggressive.
Guys don't know where they fit in anymore. I mean, if you think about it, the society. So look at the graduation rates in college.
I mean, let me just put it. The farmer already had some physical abilities to go fight in war if he needed to.
Right.
Because of what he was doing daily on the farm.
That's right.
Now we have this vision of the warrior, but a lot of us sit around, and after 10 years out of the military, now I'm kind of getting there, myself. But we know we don't really do anything with our bodies that if we were called to, most of us could not go to war tomorrow. We just get killed right away. I mean, we're just not there right now. I know you bike about 500 miles a day, so you're fit, man. But that's
not quite that big.
But anyway, sorry, I just wanted to get that in there. But go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, if we look at college graduation, so if you're talking about the patriarchy, I mean, you're talking about, now women are, what's the stats? 2 to 1 undergrads, female to male, in college enrollment right now. Over 65% graduate.
Yes, right.
With
the numbers on that.
Bachelor's degree, over 60% with a master's degree, and even PhDs. There are more women now graduating than men with the PhDs. And it's staggering to see. So what is it that men can contribute that's unique to our society? And a lot of them are at a loss, because those roles that they would instinctively have, right? If you're walking down the street with your girlfriend and you see some threatening guy coming off on one side, you normally would grab her hand, you'd kind of pull her behind you, or that's just what you do. That's just how you understand who you are. But if you're told that that's wrong, that that's bigotry, that's sexist, then what do you do? Why am I even here? What's the point?
Or
And a lot of guys
if every movie you see, the girl's supposed to be able to kick butt,
yeah,
with her jiu-jitsu kick, with her kung fu kicks, you might even be fooled into thinking that you don't have to do it, that it'll be okay. Yeah, I mean, that's, it makes me want to make a connection as to why there's a growing number of men who not only want to be, but actually think they can be mothers. It's like, okay, if there's no other role, maybe I can just take one of the roles that women usually fulfill and try and do that. I mean,
well, I've always found it fascinating that when you talk about the idea of equality, it's always been that women measure their gains of equality by a male yardstick. And by that, I mean, how successful am I at the company? Am I moving up the corporate ladder? Am I, considered powerful, and do people respect me for my authority and my things of this nature? And it's kind of like saying, I'm a basketball player, and but I want to be considered as good an athlete as a football player. So you have to judge me by football's rules. It doesn't make any sense. I can easily make an argument that what if society should value the individuals who train our next generation, because the next generation is the very fabric of the future of our culture, and not the indentured servant who has to schlep off to work from 9 to 5 in order to bring home some money. So that it's really, the value is the interchange between the individual in a domestic situation rearing the next generation of human beings as virtuous souls.
Yeah.
Why can't that be considered in and of itself something to be lauded, something to be extolled? But you never hear the feminist movement, neo-feminism, talk in those terms. They may say, well, we want it all, we want it both, but they never say we want just that. But again, see, that's an equally valid picture of what human worth is. But it's always pitched from a male perspective. Even the women who say that they're trying to escape the patriarchy are pitching their idea of success from a male perspective. And I've never been able to figure out how that's consistent.
Yeah, because what is valued in society is also, it's entirely contingent, right? I mean, so why, just ask the question, why is financial success valued highly in our society? I mean, and not just being a teacher, a grades, teaching children. Now, I mean, there's been course corrections recently, and teachers are much more highly valued than they were 20 or 30 years ago. But in the obvious case, then, as you said, like, why is sort of success outside, or just put it more simply, why is success outside the domestic house, the household, evaluated more highly than success within it, or all the tasks that go into maintaining the household? And interesting enough, I worked on a farm, a very traditional farm in Germany for several months, and the evaluation of the work outside on the farm and the work in the household was the same. It was symbiotic. It was understood by the farm, by the father and the mother and the son and any farm hands that would come and help out, like myself, that the one just does not function without the other.
Yeah,
right?
You can't pitch the hay if you don't have food to eat.
Right.
And you can't have food to eat. You can't work the back 40 unless you have the clothes patched and sewn and things like. And one of the things that Piercy argues in her book is that when we talk about people lamenting the fact that we're no longer in the era of the 50s, the traditional male pattern of the 50s. That's not necessarily the traditional male pattern. Really, the traditional male pattern is the 1850s, not the 1950s.
Yeah.
Because fathers were home with their kids and they were rearing their kids every day as much as mothers. And just as you say, they recognized that both were necessary. She had to milk the cows and he had to go out and plant the crops. And if, a storm came, everybody buckled down. It was just, you worked on your strengths as an individual, but all of those strengths were complementary so that the household, the societal unit can function.
Yeah. So, okay. So, moving then to maybe let's try and, articulate a few things that we might be biblical examples of masculinity.
Yeah. What should the church be? What should the church be doing or presenting? Because obviously there's a lot of guys out there who are searching, and this is a great evangelistic.
Well, and that's a good point. And I think this is why this vitalism is cropping up. Men are searching. So another maybe less, I think, I would say objectively, a less toxic strain of this is there's a lot of neo-stoicism popping up. You see guys reading Marcus Aurelius, the Meditations, or Epictetus, the Enchiridion or something. And they're sort of getting into that. And, think of like Gladiator, the movie Gladiator, or movies like that, where you have the virtuous pagan, who does sort of have the moral restraints, but it's not Christianity per se. They're not looking at Jesus. They're looking at sort of but some ancient figures. And that might be there was an early synthesis or attempted synthesis of Stoicism with the Christian revelation, especially by church fathers like Clement of Alexandria. So I think there's already resources there that the church can use to address people who are sort of finding themselves in that particular thought world of Stoicism. I think that's different maybe from this kind of Bronze Age, or which is, again, I think is more fantasy than well thought out philosophy or worldview. But okay, so I just wrote an article recently for the blog over at Patheos, and I tried to articulate a few points, basing them directly in the life of Jesus as we find in the Gospels. And I think one of the first point I articulated, at least, and you bounce this off of you, that I think would be directly counter this sort of vitalist idea that one should simply use whatever the powers that he has unrestrainedly, is that the godly man or the Christian man restrains power that he does possess. And we see this most explicitly in Christ when he's standing before Pilate, and the greatest atrocity known to man is about to be conducted, namely the crucifixion of that which is most holy, the God-man Jesus Christ. And he says, do you not think at this moment I could not call down a legion of angels right upon thee? So Jesus clearly, at least it's implied here, I don't want to get into certain aspects of Christology and to what extent Jesus has emptied himself of the divine prerogatives and so on and so forth. But here is Jesus clearly saying, I could, if I wanted to, call down a legion of angels and end this all right now, in the most direct kind of way.
Right.
But I'm not going to do that. So to me, this is got to be one thing that all godly men who want to follow in the image of Christ, the imitation of Christ, imitatio Christi, even if you have the power to do something, the godly man is going to probably in most contexts, except maybe the most extreme, restrain using that power.
Well, it's Matthew 5, right? The very first of the Beatitudes. Blessed are the meek.
Yeah.
For theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are the pure in heart. Blessed are the merciful. Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed who are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. These are humble attitudes, humble appropriation. What is meekness? How do you define meekness? It's power under constraint.
Right. And this, of course, is now Nietzsche in hell is writhing at just hearing.
Yes.
Because this is exactly what he thought was the transvaluation of the original values, right?
Right.
Exactly this point. And that is unescapable, right? That is true. I mean, if anybody really is out there, I'm skeptical and saying that, we've heard online from certain sources that, there's these people coming up to pastors and churches and saying, turn the other cheek is too weak. That's too weak for us. We got to do something, we got to do something different. They
may say that they're not Christians, though.
Yeah, well, okay. And it's not everybody in church is a Christian. I think we know that. But yeah, so we would want to emphasize, like, look, guys, I mean, there may be times, and I'm not a pacifist, but there certainly would be times where there might be a just application of violence in wartime and so on and so forth. But by and large, the godly man, the Christ-following man, is going to refrain from using power, especially physical power, in most circumstances. So that's got to be one.
Yeah, completely agree. And humility, again, putting others before self, imbibing the virtues to your progeny. So teaching your kids that, and not merely modeling it, you have to model it, but also you also have to engage them and show them that being a real man can mean sometimes, symbolically, basically taking a punch and not punching back.
Right.
Yeah. And the early church, this is how they grew, right? The blood of the martyrs is seed. And it was the fact that they would continue to love those individuals who and still be good citizens and not, form their Christian army to try and overthrow the Romans. Yeah. That whole concept was really anathema to most of the church. It wasn't what you wanted to see. It was, pray for those who persecute you. Vengeance is mine. I will replace it, says the Lord. So it's a selfless approach that is actually harder to execute because it's easy to feed off of your emotions.
Well, and so here's two other features then that I think we would want to argue are aspects of biblical manhood. And of course, Christ exemplifies these as well. Since we must restrain the power that we have for the sake of showing mercy and grace, right? Even if somebody might deserve, a whooping or whatever, right? We are showing and applying as godly men, we're trying to exemplify God's mercy and God's grace, right? And God's long suffering, right, and loving care. But because then we might have to take those blows, I think there is a place to say that men, especially, should be in a place, be trained to endure physical pain and suffering well. And of course, we could look at the lives of the martyrs for this as an example, but also Christ, who did not open his mouth, and kept silent when being lashed, and
Paul and Silas sat in jail, right? And
singing hymns. Yeah.
Singing hymns. Yeah. The doors got thrown open and they were still there.
Yeah.
They were still there. And it's like that was the thing that befuddled the jailer. And it caused him and his family to convert. Now, at the same time, Paul doesn't say be a whipping boy for all. Yeah, he pulls the, hey, I'm a Roman citizen card when he needs to. So, but that's working within the system. That's not usurping the authority. That's saying, hey, there's another injustice going on here.
Right. So the dynamic is, if you are going to be godly in the sense of restraining the power that you have, then there's going to be times of persecution, and a lot of those may be physical. And it is right in a sense then for the man to train and temper his body to be able to endure physical pain, so that when there is physical, and this could be also just, you get a cancer, you get attacked in, not by an agent of moral evil, but you get attacked through nature, right? That you have some capacity to suffer physically and still show the temperance, the love, and the grace, and the patience, and the meekness of Christ in that physical suffering. And I've seen people do it. I mean, it's amazing, especially in the hospital. I have a friend who was a chaplain. It's amazing to see the godly man or woman, of course, but we're emphasizing the men here. It's amazing to see a man suffer well. It really is. It's a testimony to God's goodness. When you see that. And the other aspect of that, of course, is, and I put this in there, the restraining of the emotions, right? So they go hand in hand, right?
Yeah, and we don't practice these things. We don't even, again, the one of the things that we're missing today is the practice of Christian virtues in terms of, say, fasting, solitude, right? All of these spiritual disciplines that were traditional in the church. And the reason why they were traditional in the church is that's what they teach you, how to be reliant upon your will as opposed to upon your flesh. So if you get good at fasting, it's like anything else. If you don't exercise your willpower, you won't have any. People, I can't have any will. I just can't believe I can't have any will. Well, how much do you start with it? How much do you exercise it? Start small, work more, extend those times or those things that you're purposely avoiding. And what happens is you get better at it, just like anything else. And that's part of what the spiritual disciplines were meant to do, was to make you better at not being controlled by your appetites and your bodily functions, but being able to control them.
Amen. Well, and then, so two ways that I thought of, I'm sure there are several more, that we can train, at least begin to train ourselves in physical endurance, so that we can, go through pain and suffering well, and also in the emotions. One is, and you mentioned fasting, so this is part of that. It seems right. I mean, Jesus says it's in Matthew's gospel, foxes have dens and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to rest his head. And we know that Jesus lived the life of a transient preacher. So it should be the case for us men that we avoid luxury. I mean, that's in all the church fathers, is to avoid, not just like, it's not like avoiding earning money and then using your wealth wisely. It's luxury. It's avoiding a certain kind of opulence that the church fathers understood, and others that weaken our wills. It weakens our bodies, right? And it makes us basically spiritually flabby, right? And I mean, that kind of plays back into the whole, also technology can make us very, very, very comfortable, right?
Yeah, and it makes us disenchanted from one another. I mean, it's another topic, but the whole idea of virtual friendships where we get together and chat online or via text as opposed to in person, we're missing something there.
Right. So I mean, the luxury piece, I think, we mentioned food. I mean, I say, like, one of the what used to be called one of the 7 deadly sins that I think we totally never talk about in the church today is gluttony. I mean, just the amount of food that comes out anytime you go to a restaurant when you order, and then
Anytime you go to a potluck.
oh my goodness. It's like, we don't need to eat this much. Or, and Clement of Alexandria talks about fancy foods, and it could be jewelry. I don't, all kinds of things that I think we should refrain from pursuing, and in refraining from luxury items, get the practical car, the one that works. It gets you from A to B, or, is big enough for all your kids. Fine. But refraining from that kind of luxury, I think, is conducive to, again, helping us train body and emotions. And then the other thing is, and you're going to agree with me on this one, having children, getting married and having children, and raising children.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's no other endeavor that at least I've been, other than maybe war itself. And I'm telling you, raising my 3 boys has sometimes felt physically harder than going to war. But raising children, really tempers you in every way, So I think godly men would, like Jesus, who said, "Let the children come to me," and had some pretty strong curses for anybody who messed with kids. The godly men would, if possible, right? If you're not going to live a single life, but if you're going to live a married life, and you are obviously physically, and your wife is physically capable, you need to have kids. You need to have some stinking kids, right? And raise them. So those were the ones that I came up with,
Yeah, having children will humble you for in more than one way, because first of all, that they won't agree with you, and they'll call out some of your faults and your shortcomings, and they don't sugarcoat it sometimes. So I think those are and then you also see how your wisdom sometimes actually doesn't play out the way you thought it would.
Right.
So it's definitely a challenge, but that you're trying. Yeah.
Well, I was at a conference a couple of years ago for Fellowship of St. James, that puts out 2 really excellent magazines that I'm going to plug, Touchstone and Salvo. And Carl Trueman, who wrote Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self and other books, it was just his most recent and his biggest one so far. He gave a talk on the book, and a young man stood up and asked a really good question. He's like, because the talk was on expressive individualism, living in the therapeutic culture and expressive individualism. And this young guy stood up, he's 22 years old, and he's like, I'm hearing this. I agree with it so much. But I really feel like I'm trapped in this societal, in this social imaginary. I'm a total expressive individualist. I want to get out of this. I don't know how. And he's like, what would you say practically I can do? And Truman gave a really good answer. He's like, how old are you? He's like, I'm 22 years old. He's like, do you have a girlfriend? He's like, yes. He's like, well, get married now, soon, and start having a family and raise some children together. Don't wait 10 years. Just get married, take responsibility for your new wife, and start having children with her, and take responsibility for them. You'll grow up really fast, and you won't be an individual much longer. And that was a good answer.
Yeah, that's great.
So, all right.
Well, it's even the reason I think why Jordan Peterson got so popular with his 12 rules. I mean, just something as simple: get up and make your bed in the morning.
Yeah, it's basic stuff at the end.
Yeah, it was really basic. But again, where our culture has been so detached from what it means to survive, and the skill set that takes, is we have to go all the way back to baby steps. I mean, this is 4 or 5-year-old kind of instruction.
Now, I tell you, I've written a couple articles on having children, and the biggest blowback I get is not from the Roman Catholic readers. It's from the evangelical Protestants. So there's a history here that too we got to brush up on, because the Roman Catholics have outpaced us a little bit on the issue of family, theology of the family and marriage and family. Not to say that they're perfect on that, but I got a lot of pushback that, oh no, it's all just individual choice whether or not you should have them raise children. I'm like, really? Okay.
Be fruitful and multiply, I think
No.
it says someplace.
The last thing I think that we all have to, I mean, is that the godly man has to submit to a higher authority. Now, God first and foremost, we understand that, but I think it is right and proper to submit to right and proper authorities, even more imminent ones like government, the local magistrates, your boss at work, and so on and so forth. So there is I think, an attitude of submission to authority. Again, Nietzsche is pulling his hair out in hell right now, but whatever, unless he repented, that's where he is or going to be. And of course, I think this is something that the vitalists would immediately, the Andrew Tates of the world would
buck against,
reject. But there's a reason why Saul loses his kingship and David does not. And because in spite of all David's flaws, failures, egregious sins, he always comes back and bows his knee to God and gets down on his knees and repents. The proper submission to authority is part and parcel of the godly man. So that doesn't mean that if we are in the position of being under an oppressive or unjust authority, that we may not have to resist because we can't participate in sin. We can't participate or be complicit in evil. But it does mean, I think, that our default position is if the authority is good, that is over us, we submit.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? That's the very first step an alcoholic is supposed to take, right? Step one, I recognize that there's an authority higher than you. And if you're ever going to stop the destructive patterns in your life, you have to understand that you are not the center of your world. And it just makes sense, because you have to draw upon certain moral principles, and then you have to be accountable to someone.
Yeah.
And otherwise the world doesn't make sense. Otherwise, and the pagans, again, who do they have to submit to? No one. They pick and choose their deities based on what they like and
what they can get from them.
Right? It's a selfish, a self-serving model.
Yeah. No, I think then that so to kind of bring the threads together, vitalism, not a great response to what is maybe a legitimate concern and a legitimate problem, the loss of a genuine traditional Christian and virtuous pursuit of manhood, and the attack on the traditional Christian and virtuous man. But I think we can leave the vitalism, which is probably, again, just spinning out in people's minds anyways. It's not like these guys are really going to go do anything. I hope not, at least. Well, they're probably not capable of it. But yeah, that, there's a place to recapture, I think, and promote a biblical manhood, and we'll let somebody else do the one on biblical womanhood.
There you go.
Nancy Piercy. We'll get Nancy Piercy on, and maybe she can do something.
Help give us that alternative perspective. Absolutely.
All right, Lenny. Yeah, it's good talking to you, and
always.
Certainly, I'm sure it's a topic we'll come back to another day.
That's right.
All right, brother. God bless.
Thanks. Bye. Thank you for watching this Come Reason video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to see more videos like these, consider subscribing to our Come Reason YouTube channel by clicking on the subscribe button. And you can follow us on social media. Lastly, if you'd like to help keep these kinds of videos free, consider providing a donation by clicking on the donation button beside me. Thank you.